All right. So I wanted to cover something that's been coming up frequently, as usual. There are trends that move and flow together, um, as this kind of one clarification, and this is probably the most important thing to get about this awakening thing. Um, this is what creates the seeking function. I covered this in a video called "You're Already Awake, Let Me Show You" or something, where I started with the glasses are on your head analogy. That points to um, your inherent nature as that which you're looking for. This distraction can go on for many, many years, and it's an apparent missing or apparent looking past what myself and the other non-dual speakers are pointing to or talking about. In a way, there, in my experience, there's a point in this where this path as something I'm on, that I'm doing, um, as an endeavour to achieve or attain something, that something being awakening. There's a point where it kind of starts to dawn what this is, like what we're talking about, where we're pointing, and with that, it clarifies how it's being missed. That function that's happening that seems to look forwards or look out towards something else, towards something that's not here right now. An apparent movement away from this, a fixation on an idea about what we think awakening is, what we think non-dual speakers are talking about. Um, there's a belief there, there's an assumption there that is the only way that sense of self can function. Um, by its nature, cannot understand the nature of presence, can only frame awakening as in something, as an event that happens, something else, something specific with objective qualities. Because this has no objective qualities, it can't be defined that way, it can't be recognized that way. It's before that, it's too simple. It's more simple than that. So this personal mind, this individual self, can only understand this by its own terms. And by its nature, because it doesn't understand it, it assumes that it's not here already, that it's somewhere else. That what David is talking about is something that's going to happen to me in the future, that's going to change everything. That when it happens, I will be able to objectively define that as qualified as an awakening. But it doesn't happen like that. This is the limit of language that I'm using. This is the flaw in talking about this. This is what needs to be clear about what I'm talking about. Otherwise, it will continue to elude you. The tendency is to make a thing of it. It becomes this big, grand, elusive thing. um, it seems obscure. It seems, it has gravity and importance. Like, you know, It's very rare that someone will realize this, and it means something special. It just doesn't. Um, there's no special thing called awakening. Um, the realization isn't the incredible part about this. The incredible part is what's realized, um, which is life as it is. So, awakening suggests that there is someone who wakes up, that it is an event that happens. In a way, it's quite a decent descriptive term that describes the kind of experiential flavour of what that feels like. Um, what that feels like is you were lost in thought. So there's a belief or a fixation in the content of thought, and then all of a sudden everyone will be able to relate to this. Hopefully, you recognize I'm thinking a lot. I'm kind of lost in thought. Um, right then, there's a recognition. There's a realization that I've been lost in thought. With that, the objective content of the thought, what they're talking about, there's a distance from that loses a lot of its importance, and it's replaced with a more direct and open experience. That experience being like, something notices thought as a thought. There's a breaking in the belief of the content of that thought as being something real, and it's replaced by the direct experience of thinking. So you notice something recognizes, you recognize it, I'm thinking. In that, there's a experiential quality of that very much feels like waking up from an unreal dream of thinking, of thought, of identification with the content of thought, into something more real and immediate, which is usually the just here-ness, the inherent isness of this physical experience of aliveness. You'll notice in that the senses become heightened. There's a an opening up quality to it, expansion, a relaxation, a lifting of the blinkers that we're focusing our attention directly up into this thought experience. I think everyone will relate to that. That's awakening. That is the whole thing. But it's in that moment. People will maybe remember, this has happened to me lots of times. I notice I'm lost in thought. I notice how uncomfortable it is. And there seems to be an expansion out of that in that moment of recognition. That only ever happens now. It doesn't happen multiple times. Not really. It's only ever now. That's the awakening. How could you describe the change in the quality of experience that comes about when there is a recognition that there is thinking happening? That this isn't referring to a real thing. There's something more real as the experience that is here and is inherent. Presence. Isness, maybe. Immediacy. It's simplicity. Just here-ness. There's a waking up to what is it that's here already. The only thing that can suggest the reality of something that isn't presence, that's not already here, is the belief in the content of thought that suggests there is something else, that this isn't already it. the last little bit of this seems to be a persistent doubt that this isn't it, that I'm not already awake, I'm not inherently what I'm seeking. And that doubt is very strong because it seems to be tied to our mechanism of survival. I doubt the known than the unknown to keep myself safe. The last little part of this seems to be a persistent doubt. And in that persistent doubt, you'll notice that there's a fixation on something that's not this. Something that's not already here. Some otherness or something elseness. With that function, there seems to be a moving away from what is here. A moving away from, or an aversion, or a subtle dissociation from experience inherently as it is now, to move into a suggestion of a better this, of a something that's maybe in the future or different, a turning away from experience as it is in favour of seeming to move towards something better. Desire and aversion, as described in the Buddhist traditions. Getting familiar with what's actually happening there, this function. You could easily take what I'm talking about in this channel to be something that isn't here. But what I'm pointing to is straight back towards you, whoever's listening, deeply into your experience as it is now, not somewhere or something else, not a different version of the experience that is accessible post-awakening, not an event called awakening, but the inherent awakeness that is here in your experience now. What's making it look like there is something that's not that? There is something called awakening that's going to happen and change things for me. It's a movement away from this to focus on something else. There's a dissociation, a deadening, a distance from the immediacy and the intimacy of your experience as it is now. So there ends up being this 180 turn where it starts to dawn where what we're talking about here isn't something. What we're talking about here is getting closer and more presently in touch with your experience as it is now and exploring that. Becoming aware of the function that is happening and it always happens right now that suggests that this isn't the case already, this isn't inherent. I need to go somewhere or do something or clarify something or attain something called awakening by exerting effort or going somewhere or learning more stuff or whatever. The 180 turn is a great relaxation because the attention, we notice that there's this pull up of attention. For me, it was kind of like backing up into an internal world that had a narrative context in it. The narrative was based on me, the one doing this, that could only understand this within its own terms, that could only talk about this or assume that this isn't here already, that this is going to get better, that there's a better this that doesn't have problems in it. that doesn't have uncomfortable sensations in it, that doesn't have suffering in it. In that, there is an overlooking of the suffering that is here by fixating on something else in the future to try and get out of it. And the suffering that is happening is presence, is here now. So there's a turning in towards that internal world and looking at what is it that's making it look like this is a real thing, that I have to move, that I have to distract, or I'm restless and discontent. I need to do something about this. It's in thought, it's in the content of thought, what the thoughts are talking about and what they are suggesting, and framing this in a way that I'm going to understand this, that I'm going to get this, that I'm moving towards something called awakening as the person. When we comprehend this from that point of view of the self, of the objective mind, we inherit those limitations as a real thing. We're looking from that for something called awakening, not realizing that what's looking, that we are, is what we are looking for. How to realize that, how to clarify that is stop. Something has to stop. The subject-object function is looking out for. When we look from, we can only look for. What happens when we stop looking, in a sense, for something else? What happens when we expand out, or so to speak, look back, look within at the identity? What am I here that feels like it is on a path that's moving towards something? There's a stopping to that. There's a simplification out of that function, which is a happening, a movement. There's an effort in that. This requires, only half true, no effort. Or what you are as your nature requires no effort. There does seem to need to be force, or I'm going to contradict myself, an effort involved when it comes to practice. Because once you've tasted this, right, the strange thing about it is all of you here, most of you here, know this. At some deep and intuitive level, you can feel it. That's why you're here. If you feel like you're still seeking, there's something being added to and on top of that to complexify it, an attempt to mentally grasp. From that position, that felt sense intuitively of your true nature, that is, you can feel it here. It doesn't register on that level because it's prior to that. The subject starts beyond that because it is made of that. It appears within and as that. So how do we get behind that? Simply see what's happening. And we can test, let's watch this function happen in real time right now. Okay, so something that is inherent, something that is certainly just here. I'm going to suggest the sense experience. So something we know is always here is the sensation in the body. If you're in a static position, an object or objects in the field of vision. a sound that, so I've got a hum of a refrigerator that is constantly there. Clearly, there's a just isness, a here-ness, a reality to this that is more solid, more inherent, more primary than the constantly moving and ephemeral appearances of thought that move and come and go. In that, there seems to be a constantly here subject. There seems to be. Move your attention to any one of these sense phenomenon. Something that doesn't move and change, something that is just here. So I'm going to use the sensation in my hands and my awareness of this room, but don't make it too complicated. So I'm going to move the attention there, and I'm going to hold my attention in those sensations, in that sensory experience that is most certainly just here. And it helps to, if it seems like dead inert matter that's not interesting, it's not going to capture your attention. Have it capture your attention. Have that existential question of the mystery of life. What is this? Move your attention into that sensation, and then we're just going to hold it there with 100% of your attention. And then we're going to watch what happens that is most likely, for most of you, is going to pull your attention, before you know it, away from those sensations into an internal world of thought. And it happens before you know it. There's not a definitive point where you're like, oh, my attention is now moving up. Okay, we want to get closer to that point, but it's before you know it, it'll have come through the back door and started, and your attention has moved away from the sense objects. So do it now. Move the attention to the sense objects, to presence. Hold it there. You don't need to think about it. Appreciate it simply for what it is. What's happening? You can pause this video if you want. Can you see what's happening? Can you see the attention is habitually being pulled away from immediacy into the suggestion of something else, into a narrative about something, an image of something that's not in experience? That magnetism, that habitual momentum, it is what practice is there to break, to stop. So we connect more with being than becoming. there's a stopping of that something. There's a stopping of that function. That function relaxes down. And when it relaxes down, we can see the context on which it's based, the experience of a separate self. And something opens up from that enclosed position, that assumption, into what's actually here, what you are that's actually here. And clearly it's inherent. It already is. It doesn't require effort. It doesn't need to be comprehended by thought, by description, or by confirmation. It's constantly and infinitely confirming itself, as what it is, in pure awareness, pure presence, pure immediacy, and that is what you are. What stops is that function that seems to move away from this. And it's a relational thing from an assumed position of me. That stops. It's obscuring quality that it can suggest that you're not already non-dual nature. You're not already awake. That stops with it. So something loses its reality. The felt realness of existing in life as a separate me, as a separate character. Something more real replaces it. The substance of this. You could say what the thought appears in, or what the thought is made from. What you are. So there's a 180, there's a stopping, and there's like a falling backwards or dropping more deeply into presence that happens. And then the pointing can become much more potent, because it's not being used as a distraction. It's not being used to fixate on language, or the limitations of the objective mind aren't being reinforced by the belief that David's talking about something called awakening. And then you know what I mean when I say there is no awakening, there's just awakeness. There's only what seems to be not that. What seems to be not that isn't real. So there never was an awakening. you already are it. It is what you are. What a relief. What a massive relief. Then there's a difference in my experience in the quality of experience, in that you can get deeply into and connect in a joyful and curious way with the mystery of this presence, of this awareness, because we're not looking for anything in it anymore. We can authentically, without distraction, explore the nature of presence. And rather than that having to clarify or get better or whatever, the inquiry is joyful. The investigation becomes like more of a hobby, more of a fun thing that you can do whenever you like or all the time, than an endeavour for a purpose. Then we can get deeply in touch with the nature of suffering as it's appearing now, without the need to get rid of it. We investigate deeply, what suffering is, what's happening there, what it's made of. And we might see that what we thought was suffering wasn't. It was just an idea, was just an aversion from what is. And we can see that any aspect of your experience At any point you can look into this. All of this, inexclusive of anything, including the suffering, including this discomfort, the pain, including the illusory experience of self, is non-dual nature. None of it is separate. None of it isn't what I'm talking about. None of your experience isn't what I'm talking about, what I'm pointing to. So then again, the words just lose their meaning. It gets more simple, less heavy, it gets light. The gravity and the importance is gone. The putting awakening on a pedestal as something to attain doesn't make sense anymore. And we can really just enjoy this path, because the path ends at some point. That whole seeking thing stops at some point, so we can start to enjoy it. We can start to enjoy the investigation, because we're no longer trying to get out of something. We're getting more deeply into something, more deeply into what we are, essentially. Anyway, that'll do for now. I'll talk to you next time.